Hey there, it's the board game Bandit, and today I want to talk about something I call the B-side problem. Games that have basic and advanced play variants. I call this the B-side problem because the first time I encountered such a phenomenon was playing Seven Wonders. If you think about the Wonder boards, there is an A and a B side, the latter of which is much more complicated and diverse. The game recommends that you play with the A side for the first few times. I have several games in my collection that have the same structure, regardless of what they call it. Basic or advanced, classic or expert, A or B. It goes by many names. But many of these games happen to have the same problem. I never get to play the B side because I am constantly playing the game with new people, and that forces me to simplify the game to the appropriate side, in this case, the A side. Whether or not to include an expansion is also indicative of the B side's problem. This is a problem, and I'm not really sure that there is a solution for it. One of the games of my 10x10 challenge is Elysium, and I suspect that when the challenge is over, this will end up being in the top 3 favorite games from the challenge, which is great considering that Smash Up isn't leaving the top spot. Elysium is a drafting game that comes with 8 different gods, and you'll be choosing 5 of them, which makes 56 unique combinations. However, the game highly recommends that you play with a certain set of gods for your first game: Athena, Hades, Hephaestus, Poseidon, and Zeus. I really liked this set, but I was dying to use some of the other gods to see what they do. Yet I couldn't because the game suggested that I stick to the starter set if there are any new players. I finally had the opportunity to play with 3 other players who knew the game this past Saturday, and I swapped out Athena and Poseidon for Apollo and Hermes. That was an absolutely fascinating, nail-biting game, and having played through with 2 of the 3 new gods, I can safely say that Elysium is 100% correct that new players should stick with the standard set. There is simply too much to process and consider with the advanced gods for your first game, and the game is difficult enough to strategize in the basic set. Elysium was an example of a game that assessed itself correctly. But what about other games? The B-side problem stems from the fact that you are relying on the game to offer a sense of its differences in complexity, while the game has no information about you, the audience playing it. The game has to make a general sense of its intended target audience and see how the different modes will compare for that audience. When you are playing a game for the first time, you don't know how the rules will translate to complexity, so your best bet is to rely on the game's aforementioned determination. Neither side has any information about the other. So what happens if the game is wrong and underestimates you? I consider Eminent Domain to be one of the most underrated deck builders out there, and I'd never get to play it as often as I want to. While I can say that about many games, this one has a particular reason. Besides the learning curve that I normally have to deal with, a number of my friends have played it and found it to be mediocre, thus they may not want to play it again. In actuality, the game's rulebook states that a certain part of the game, the technology cards, may be overwhelming for new players and to teach them the game without it. If I'm being honest, Eminent Domain is probably a terrible game without them. You are literally removing the most interesting part of the game, as well as the research cards that allow you to thin your deck and make your strategy more cohesive. Of course people are going to think that the game isn't great, because they removed all the urgency and nuance. Players will be getting a fundamentally different experience, and probably not a good one if you dumb the game down. But if you leave them in, the experienced player will probably win because they know how to acquire the technology cards best. Would you rather have a terrible experience because the game was boring, or a terrible experience because you got destroyed? That's a tough choice. Game designers are obviously in a predicament because learning curves are a difficult reality in the industry. They can prevent games from getting to the table, and the games with the longest learning curves are the ones I'm least likely to want to explain, since I'm expecting a commitment from the person to play it multiple times, and that doesn't always happen. For the experienced player, you are repeatedly scratching the surface of a game to provide an easier experience for new players, but if you're like me and you are constantly the one teaching games, or if your group is large enough that you have rotation among your individual subgroups for games, what choice do you have? Sometimes a game is marked as being more complex than it is, and Dragon's Gold is a great example of this. I have only ever played with the advanced version because that should be the only version. Dragon's Gold is a great game of negotiation where you are banding together to defeat a dragon and split the loot in a way that all involved parties agree. The advanced rules change how certain gems score as well as how the wizard and the thief roles operate, but they are just so straightforward that I don't even remember what the basic rules were. I had to look them up, and just like Eminent Domain, they would greatly reduce the enjoyment of the game and not attract the correct audience. Dragon's Gold is a negotiation game, and the basic rules nullify almost all the intrigue of the negotiation of the game. If you have a chance to play this game, skip the basic rules and just use the advanced. There's no reason to downgrade, it's very easy to learn and play. Imhotep is one of my favorite games, and like Seven Wonders, the boards have A and B sides. However, while Seven Wonders has individual boards with a different level, Imhotep's boards are shared across all the players. The more I play Seven Wonders, the more I believe that the B sides are actually better, not just more difficult than the A side. Therefore, to give an experienced player a B side might be an advantage which they don't need in Seven Wonders anyway. But the A side is much more boring and straightforward, and I almost always take a B side when they are available. Imhotep doesn't have this problem, and each scoring board can be put to either side. Therefore, you can customize the game as a combination of A or B for each individual board. For example, make the Market and Temples cards a B side since they aren't that much more complex than their counterparts, but they add a lot of intrigue. Even just one B side makes the game that much better, although I love the game even with just the basic sides. I've only gotten to play the game once with all B sides because of the same new player problem, but now I know that I won't do A's anymore because I don't have to. If you haven't played this game, you need to try it, and I cannot wait for the new C sides coming out of this summer. So as you can see, every game situation is different, and there aren't any golden rules that I found, other than to trust yourself and those in your group. If you feel like challenging people, add in the extra rules because if you're a serious gamer already, you're more likely to be okay with adversity rather than mediocrity. You'll have to evaluate them on a game-by-game, group-by-group basis. With a game like Quadropolis, I would lean towards the classic mode because I feel like the game is won by focusing on fewer buildings rather than more, and expert mode introduces more options which might spread new players thin. I think the game is interesting enough even at the basic level, and I look forward to trying the expert version once I get to play with repeat players, which still hasn't happened. With Arctic Scavengers, another deck building game with a lot of modules, most of which I haven't used, I found success with including a few cards from the Recon expansion, such as medics and rifles. They just add more to the game without adding any extra rules, and having those cards is helpful. I've taught Citadels many times with Dark City characters without ever telling players that they were expansion characters, unless they noticed the mark on the card. The game is taught smoothly with them, and in fact, I prefer to teach the game without the Warlord to speed it up. With Archaeology: The New Expedition, I got tired of using the standard Great Pyramid monument and have had success with using the temple instead. I use the temple because it requires 2 maps, and some of the others are just automatic map plays if you have 1 map. It takes away the tension of needing to hold the map in your hand and risk losing it to another player or a sandstorm. In Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, if I have at least 7 players, I will never play without the witness and the accomplice. These should not be optional roles, you really should play with them every time. Fairy Tale has 30 expert cards that greatly shake up the game, but I've had mixed results with including them with new players. Sometimes players struggle with the game even with just the base cards, so while I feel they are necessary, empirical evidence has not been kind to them. I could go on with more examples ad nauseum, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is no golden solution to this problem. In general, I think gaming needs to do a better job of conveying what is the appropriate level for teaching a game to new players. I've often found that the Board Game Geek weight category is very helpful, but it doesn't factor in basic versus advanced mode and is usually just representative of advanced. Perhaps we can annotate it for particular modes in the notes. One solution is simply to play games with the same people over and over again, but that prevents the spread of gaming and isn't a solution for me at all. I don't fault game designers for trying to make recommendations on how to best teach their work, and I tend to believe that this is a necessary evil. I hope that, if you come across some of the games I've mentioned, you can use my recommendations to make a more informed decision about how to teach the game. I know that with Smash Up, which does not have a basic mode, I get asked all the times about what is the best way to teach the game, particularly what factions to give to new players. Learning curves are a real problem, and while the B-side concept is designed to help new players, unfortunately, it can end up hurting the experienced ones. Do you have any examples of games where you were stuck on basic mode? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and our game has just begun.